Good day, I am Hannah May Maluluyon and I will discuss the introduction and definition of human communication. The relationship between culture and communication is not straightforward, but rather is varied, personal, and combined. It is important to understand the process of human communication to be an effective intercultural communicator. It is also vital to know the impact of cultural dimensions and power in communicative events that take place within a particular environment. To better understand the role of communication in intercultural interactions, we will discuss the nature, properties, and components of communication. Finally, the characteristics of an effective intercultural communicator in second language situations. Definitions of human communication. According to Theo Hyman, communication means the process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. Just like culture, human communication is hard to define and scholars have given it different definitions over time. Here are some of the most common elements associated with communication and the definition that describe the element that is emphasized. Number 1 is process. According to Carey, communication is a symbolic process whereby reality is produced, maintained, repaired, and transformed. What Carey means by reality here is a more substantial domain of existence layered upon a real world of objects, the events, and processes that we observe. Second is dynamic. According to Martin and Nakayama, communication is dynamic. This means that communication is not a single event but is ongoing, so that communicators are at once both senders and receivers. Communication is not fixed and is changing constantly. Third is interactive or transactive. Communication is the process by which individuals try to exchange ideas, feelings, symbols, meanings to create commonality. Communication is a two-way process as both the sender and receiver are involved in an alternate position for sending a message and giving feedback. Fourth is symbolic. According to Burleson and Steiner, communication is the transmission of information, ideas, emotion, skills, etc. by the use of symbols, words, pictures, figures, graphs, and etc. Some people are not able to use speech to communicate, so they may need to use symbols to express their thoughts or feelings to let others understand the message they want to communicate. Fifth is intentional and unintentional. Unintentional messages are not purposeful but may be transmitted by action as well as by words. Words are used to communicate which are intentional. Sometimes these words or messages communicate something other than what is intended, or they have an intentional meaning depending on the person receiving it. 6 is situated and contextual. Communication is dependent on the context in which it occurs. Communication is contextual when both parties involved know that the current conversation is about, they are aware of the relation, environmental, and cultural context of the exchange of messages. Seventh is pervasive. Communication is the process through which participants create and share information with one another as they move toward reaching mutual understanding. Communication is involved in every aspect of daily life, from birth to death. It is universal. Communication is a pervasive activity which encompasses all facets of our lives. Our life is spent mostly in communicating each other. Next is power infused. Communication is the mechanism by which power is exerted. Communication is a powerful component of leadership. Communicating is a must in good times or bad times. Your communication should clarify objectives, expectations, and progress. Last is cultural. Communication is a process of utilizing cultural resources. Cultural communication is the use of communication to carry out the activities and commitments of their particular communities through the use of symbolic resources.
Good day everyone, I'm Rina Angeli A. Mante from BPA 2B. So today we'll be discussing the components of human communication. The transfer of message from a sender to a recipient in an intelligible manner is the finest definition of communication. So let's get started. First, I will show you the figure of communication process. So to understand that figure, let's start to familiarize the definition of it. First is sender. It's a person who is sending a message through verbally or non-verbally. Example is Henry asked Johnny about the right pathway to Jeju Island. So Henry is the sender while Johnny is the receiver. Encoding is the process of putting an idea or message into a set of symbols. Encoding also occurs when the sender begins to formulate the message. Next is message. A message is a process that allows the sender and the receiver to form an communication to each other. Example for that is text messages, email, and appointment reminders. Channel is a type of media through which a message is sent and received. There are three types of channel. Verbal communication is the most used channel in day-to-day activities. Example is when you talk to someone physically. Next is written communication. It's a widely used channel of communication and it's more formal because you take time and process your message. Lastly is non-verbal communication. It's the easiest way to communicate because unlike written communication, you don't need to write the thought you want to send to your receiver. You only need to use your physical appearance or actions. Noise interference refers to anything that interferes with the communication process between the sender and the receiver. Example is background sounds, hearing impairment, unfamiliar jargon, and professional terminology. Receiver is the person who is receiving the message that is being sent. Let's use the same example. So Henry asked Johnny about the right pathway to Jeju Island. So Johnny is the receiver because he's the one who received the message coming from the sender, which is Henry. Decoding is simply turning communication into thoughts. Example, I'm sleepy. Do you want to sleep? So next is the receiver response. It's the function of the receiver to the message. Feedback is a response from a receiver to a message. It's like the reaction to what you've said to them. Lastly, it's context. It's the overall environment in the communication process. Example, political, physical, and psychological. So we already know the definitions of human communication. Let's go back to our figure. So as you can see in this picture, that's the flow of the communication process. It always starts to the sender, and the sender encoding his or her thoughts to formulate to a message, and after that channel, it is where the message is sent to receiver. And also in channel we encounter some barrier, which is the noise and the feedback. Sometimes the sender and the receiver may experience a misunderstanding along in the conversation because it's where the interference occur. Example, environment noise, where the sender and the receiver talking. After channel, it's receiver. Receiver accept the sender message, so it's the sender turn to decode, and after the receiver decoding his or her thoughts, then the receiver responds to the sender. That's for today's video. I hope you learn how the components of human nature works. That's it, and have a good day.
Hi, good day. I am Alberta Ocon from BPA2-B. So in this video, I am going to tackle about the communication properties. So we all know that communication means transferring thoughts, information, emotion, and ideas through gesture, voice, symbols, signs, and expression from one person to another. So to better understand communication and its implications, there are 9 communication properties. Property 1 is the communication is a process. It involves several components such as the sender of the communication, the actual message being sent, the encoding of the message, and the receiver and the decoding of the message. So, property 1 involves an interrelated, interdependent group of elements working together to achieve a desired outcome or goal. It is a series of action steps taken in order to successfully communicate. For example, the sender could deliver the message by speaking to the receiver face to face. In this case, the receiver receives the message. Then the receiver will process the message according to the communication channel the sender uses. So, okay, let's proceed to the property 2, which is the communication is a dynamic. It is characterized by energy or action. It is always developing and never passive or static. In intercultural interactions, elements in the communication process are also interdependent, variable, and dynamic, as well as being irreversible. Intercultural communication is time-bound and flexible. For example, the ability to hear the words someone else is saying is only one small part of dynamic communication that involves the ability to read facial expressions, gestures, tone of voice, and body posture at the same time as listening to the what person has to say. Active participation means that people are consciously directing their messages to someone else. Thus, the communication is transactive because individuals both send and receive messages. So the interaction between two or more people is a fundamental dimension of communication. that work through ideas in their head or out loud. For example, classroom instruction is an example of interactive communication, wherein feedback from receivers influences the transmission of messages by sender. Next is property 4, which is the communication is symbolic. Symbolic communication refers to communication that involves a shared message between the sender and the receiver. For example, sign language, picture communication systems, and tactile communication systems. Speech, by the way, is also symbolic. Each gesture, vocal sound, bodily movement has meaning, and meaning itself is symbolic. Symbolic of a reality that is, in a sense, greater than communication. Property 5. Communication is both intentional and unintentional. Intentional communication is a situation in which two or more people consciously engage in interaction with a specific purpose in mind. For example, if Albie says to specific purpose in mind. For example, if Albie says to Christian, "Would you like to go to the basketball game tonight?" And he replies, "Sure, what time should we leave?" So in the example given, the intentional communication has occurred and they'll soon head off to the event together. Unintentional communication may also be taking place. For example, Christian may believe that Albie is asking him to go to the game because she is romantically interested in him, when in fact, she just wants to go with him as a friend. What makes communication intentional? Something that is done with intention or on purpose. Intentional communication can be called conscious communication. This implies that we are speaking with awareness of our purpose and its effect on others. And then what makes communication unintentional? Those are not purposeful but may be by actions as well as by words. These are messages that were not intended to be sent or were not intended for the individual who received it. Oftentimes, these are messages that are conveyed in nonverbal communication. So, property 6. Communication is situated and contextual. Situational context describes the reason why something is occurring and the appropriate behavior and actions associated with the situation. So, situational is for pertaining to a particular situation, while contextual is of pertaining to or depending on the context of information relating to the situation or location in which the information was found. An example of context of situation could take place in a shop. The field could be the price of certain item. The tenor would be a slight difference in the shop assistant part towards the customer because of a potential sale. Then the mode would be that of spoken inquiry, such as question, answer, and response. And then let's proceed to property 7, which is communication as pervasive. A pervasive communication, distributed presence of identity in a pervasive communication. The availability of a user is determined by the set of devices available in his surroundings. This means that anytime you are perceived by another person, you are communicating messages about yourself and your emotions, even though they may be below your level of awareness. So, communication can shine a spotlight on problems, making them easier to see and offering a stage to popularize solutions, although not always of use. Power influences the communication process. Communication is power, and like all power, How you use it matters. When people from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds interact, they do not share an equal power status. As Kubota 2012 explains, actual intercultural interactions are largely influenced by where one is positional in the power hierarchy in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, age, language, physical ableness, sexual identity, and other social categories. And then lastly is property 9, communication is cultural. Culture shapes communication. Through enculturation, the process of primary language and cultural socialization, we learn how to communicate in ways that are deemed appropriate in our culture. The verbal and nonverbal symbols we use to communicate with our in-group members are strongly influenced by our linguistic and cultural socialization. The way people communicate is the way they live. Indeed, cultural communication pertains to the use of language and other communicative means to carry out the activities and commitments of their particular communities in and through the use of symbolic resources. That's all, thank you, and I hope you've learned something from the discussion. Goodbye, God bless.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Christine A. Tagsip, and I'm here to discuss the language, culture, and communication style. As many interculturalists believe that our preferred modes of communication are impacted by where we came from, our background culture, our origin and language, our heritage and religion, our family, our friends, and our education. Indeed, enculturation has an impact on each of us. So let's discuss the differences in speech and communication style and how they could affect intercultural interactions. Style of speech. Linguistic style. According to Deborah Tan in 1995, a social linguist who has written widely on gender, language, culture, power, and communication. She defined linguistic style to an individual characteristic speaking pattern. According to her, it is a set of culturally learned signals by which we not only communicate what we meant, but also interpret others' meanings, since it includes the features as degree of directness or indirectness, pacing and pausing, word choice, and the use of elements as joke, sarcasm, figure of speech, stories, questions, silence, and apologies. One speech style is made up of choices regarding a wide range of linguistic style. For example, I came from Bohol and I'm personally a Boholana. So we use the word ija-ija, aho-aho, but it doesn't mean we have that kind of attitude. We just simply change the letter Y into J and the letter K into H, so the word iya-iya, ako-ako will sounds like ija-ija, aho-aho. So that is our speech style as Boholanos. Howard Gills and his associates have developed communication accommodation theory, which emphasizes the adjustments that people does while communicating. It elaborates the human tendency to adjust their behaviors while interacting. The factors that lead to accommodation activity are adjustments which can be through verbal communication or through gestures. There are two types of accommodation process explained in this theory, the convergence and the divergence. So first, the convergence is a process where people tend to adopt other person's communication characteristics to reduce the social distance. So for example, I'm Bisaya and stayed in Manila. So I tend to adopt their communication characteristic by speaking Tagalog in order to reduce the social distance. Next is the divergence, the process that contradicts the method of adoption, and in this context, the individual emphasizes is on the social differences and non-verbal differences between the interactants. For example, me and my friend are talking on Tagalog or Filipino language, and when I'm pissed of her, I switch my dialect into Visaya, which she can't understand. So this emphasizes the difference among the close relation with each other. So in other words, the act of convergence is bringing the interactants together, while the divergence has the opposite effect. Speech style as audience design. According to Bell 2007, a sociolinguist in New Zealand, he defined the speech style as the dimension of language individual speaker have a choice. According to him, we do not always speak in constantly the same way. We're shifting the way we talk in different ways. On different occasions, we talk in different ways, which is absolutely true. The style shifting and code switching is quite relevant to this discussion, so we will tackle them. Eckert and Rickford 2011 defined the style shifting to a process of adjustment or changing from one style to another. It is the use of more than one style of speech during the course of single conversation or written text, while code switching is changing between different languages. The audience design framework is developed by Bell, which indicates that the speaker may make choices about their speech style, same as the communication accommodation theory that can influence interpersonal, intercultural relations. Communication style. According to Sapphire et al. 2005, communication style is the way in which we communicate, a pattern of verbal and nonverbal behaviors that compromises our preferred ways of giving and receiving information in a specific situations. Communication style is more broad than linguistic style, since linguistic style focuses on patterns of language use, while communication style, according to Zhu Hao 2011 419, is the way individual or group of individuals communicate with others. For us to understand it better, according to Sapphire et al. 2005, if the message content is the what and the communicator is the who, then communication style is the how. People have these verbal and non-verbal patterns that influence how we communicate and may not match our evolving thoughts and emotions. And as a result, what we say doesn't always align with what we meant, as we give the others the wrong impressions of what we want to communicate. High context versus low context communication. Hall 1976 and 1983, an anthropologist categorized cultures into two broad types, the high context and the low context, since there's an influence of cultures on communication style. According to him, context features and communication styles among cultures are closely correlated with the cultural dimensions of individualism and collectivism. Individualism and collectivism has this following trait. The collectivist culture has these characteristics: community, collaboration, shared interest, harmony, tradition, the public good, and maintaining faith. While individualistic culture places more emphasis on personal rights and responsibility, privacy, voicing one's opinion, freedom, innovation, and self-expression. High context culture. Most of the information is communicated through indirect and nonverbal means with a reliance of mutuality, shared knowledge. In indirect communication, implicit, verbal messages, subtitle nonverbal behaviors such as poses, silence, the use of space, gestures, and avoidance of the eye contact. According to D. Capua and Wintergerst 2004-71, high context communications occurs in cultures that stress communication through the context of social interactions such as gender, age, status, and other cultural elements, and the physical environment in which the interaction is taking place. According to Hall 1981, these communication styles usually found in collectivist-oriented nations such as China, Japan, Mexico, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and more. Low context culture. Information is explicitly communicated through direct, specific, and literal expressions. In indirect communications, the speaker intentions and views are made clear by the use of clear, direct speech and forthright tone of voice. According to D. Capua and Wintergerst 2004-71, in low context culture, the primary responsibility for ensuring that listeners correctly receive and interpret verbal messages rests on speakers. According to Hall 1976, this communication style is usually found in individualistic-oriented nations such as Australia, Canada, Denmark, and more. Interactions between the low context and high context communicators may be frustrating and lead to mistrust and anxiety until the individual develop more understanding of variations in communication style. Limitations of communication styles typologies. As many interculturalists have been greatly influenced by E.T. Hall's continuum of high and low context, we must be cautious and not assume that everyone in particular part of the world behave in certain ways. For example, not all from collectivist-oriented nations such as China, Japan, Mexico, and more are more favored in indirect style of communications. The degree of directness and formality may vary among individuals. Our communication style preferences reflect not only our linguistic and cultural socialization, but our individual, personal preferences, and unique experiences. People may also favor one communication style over in particular situations as part of our personal preferences. For example, we use a direct communications in the school or if we approach a teacher, but we use more indirect communication with friends. That's all for my discussion. Francis Villando will discuss the next topic.
Good day, everyone. My name is Princess Villando from Group 1, and right now we're going to tackle about the characteristics of an effective intercultural communicator in second language situations. But for us to understand more about the topic, let us have an overview about what is intercultural communication. According to Zhu Hua 2011, intercultural communication refers to a situation where people from different cultural backgrounds come into contact with each other. Thus, intercultural communication essentially means communication across different cultural boundaries. When two or more people with different cultural backgrounds interact and communicate with each other or one another, we can say that intercultural communication is taking place. It also includes in my topic about what is a second language. I know that most of us here already know that second language is any language spoken by someone other than their first language. Furthermore, a second language is a language that is not the native language or first language of the speaker. So, since we already know that what is intercultural communication and what is a second language, let us proceed to what is the characteristics of an effective intercultural communication in second language situations. Effective intercultural communication by H.J.D. Looper is the communication between people with several cultural contexts. Because we are all different, it is important to recognize each other's communication manners and then learn to handle them. In intercultural interactions as well, you may find yourself in situations where you are using your first language to communicate with someone from a different linguistic and cultural background. The following are some suggestions to become an effective intercultural communicator in such situations. First and foremost, learn about different cultures and values. This is one of the most important things that anyone can do. The internet is an amazing place to learn more about different countries and cultures. There are also travel documentaries available in a wide variety of streaming platforms too. Maps and books are other resources that are widely available that you can use so that you will be able to learn more about the different cultures and values in every country. The second one is be sensitive to the cultural beliefs, values, gender differences, and politeness norms that may underlie different styles of communication. It simply means that we must be aware that people are not the same. Of course, as a human being, we are born with different personality, different cultures, as well as tradition. That is why we must recognize that our culture is no better than any other culture. The third one is recognize your personal style of communicating and make an effort to determine how your communication partners are perceiving you. One big plus of having a personal communication style is that your communications allows you to build deep personal relationship with other people. So right now you can also discover your personal style of communication. The next one, bear in mind that miscommunication may be due to language barriers rather than cultural difference. There are many ways to learn to communicate with someone without speaking the same language. One example for that is the body language as well as the sign language. It also one of the way to facilitate communication. At the same time, you can also learn some words for the other person that you are talking. Number 5, practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is an incredibly important skill for intercultural communicators. It is important to pay close attention to our own emotional responses and behavioral patterns which may differ between both cultures. Next one is suspend judgment. Suspend judgment until we can claim that we truly understand the other culture. There will always be situations where certain aspects of the other culture will evoke negative emotions within us. In these situations, it is easy to judge certain behaviors or ways of thinking of the other culture by placing negative labels upon them. This will not only make effective communication with people from the other culture impossible, but it will also make it impossible for us to learn and grow as well. Of course, we all judge other cultures in one way or the other. But the important point is, again, to suspend judgment until we can claim that we truly understand the other culture. Otherwise, we will misjudge the culture for something that it is not. Number 7, always double check any assumption you are making about another culture. Even if you have spent a significant amount of time reflecting on the behavior of people from another culture, you should still remain cautious about coming to any final conclusions on your own. It makes more sense to double check as well with other sources or with other people that have more knowledge of the other culture compared to you. The last one gonna be open-minded. Although this may be easier said than done for some people, understanding the worldview of others and learning to appreciate the differences is crucial. Not everyone will have the same views as your own, but sometimes listening to what others think and why they think that way will give you a better understanding of them. Any biases or assumptions you may have will need to be put aside. Ask questions on aspects of the culture or language that may confuse you, and listen intently to responses. While these strategies have been suggested with second language situations in mind, many may also enhance your interaction with people who share your first language but differ from you in terms of age, gender, religion, and etc. As a sensitive and respectful intercultural communicator, you can take steps to reduce the power gap and cultivate more equitable, satisfying relationships. Ultimately, have fun with learning and communicating. These are just some tips and tricks to get you started on the journey of effective intercultural communication. That would be all. Thank you so much for listening.